Philip II, called Philip Augustus, was King of France from 1180 to 1223, a member of the House of Capet. Philip's predecessors had been known as kings of the Franks, but from 1190 onward, Philip became the first French monarch to style himself King of France, the son of King Louis VII and his third wife, Adèle of Champagne. He was originally nicknamed Dieudonné, God-given, because he was the first son of Louis VII, born late in his father's life. Philip was given the nickname Augustus by the chronicler Rigord for having extended the crown lands of France so remarkably. After a 12-year struggle with the Plantagenet dynasty in the Anglo-French War of 1202–14, Philip broke up the large Angevin empire presided over by the Crown of England and defeated a coalition of his rivals at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. This victory would have a lasting impact on Western European politics. The authority of the French king became unchallenged, while the English King John was forced by his barons to sign the Magna Carta and deal with a rebellion against him aided by Philip. The First Barons' War, the military actions surrounding the Albigensian Crusade helped prepare the expansion of France southward. Philip did not participate directly in these actions, but he allowed his vassals and knights to help carry it out. Philip transformed France from a small feudal state into the most prosperous and powerful country in Europe. He checked the power of the nobles and helped the towns to free themselves from seigneurial authority, granting privileges and liberties to the emergent bourgeoisie. He built a great wall around Paris, reorganized the French government and brought financial stability to his country. Early years. Philip was born in Gonesse on the 21st of August 1165. King Louis VII intended to make his son Philip co-ruler with him as soon as possible, in accordance with the traditions of the House of Capet, but these plans were delayed when Philip, at the age of 13, was separated from his companions during a royal hunt and became lost in the forest of Compiègne. He spent much of the following night attempting to find his way out, but to no avail. Exhausted by cold, hunger and fatigue, he was eventually discovered by a peasant carrying a charcoal burner, but his exposure to the elements meant he soon contracted a dangerously high fever. His father went on pilgrimage to the shrine of Thomas Becket to pray for Philip's recovery and was told that his son had indeed recovered. However, on his way back to Paris, he suffered a stroke. In declining health, Louis VII had his 14-year-old son crowned and anointed as king at Reims on the 1st of November 1179 by the Archbishop Guillaume aux Blanches Mains. He was married on the 28th of April 1180 to Isabel of Hainaut, the daughter of Baldwin V, Count of Hainaut, and Margaret I, Countess of Flanders, who brought the county of Artois as her dowry. For the time of his coronation, all real power was transferred to Philip, as his father slowly descended into senility. The great nobles were discontented with Philip's advantageous marriage, while his mother and 4 uncles, all of whom exercised enormous influence over Louis, were extremely unhappy with his attainment of the throne, which caused a diminution of the power. Eventually, Louis died on the 18th of September 1180. Consolidation of the royal domain. While the royal domain had increased under Philip I and Louis VI, it had diminished slightly under Louis VII. In April 1182, partially to enrich the French crown, Philip expelled all Jews from the domain and confiscated their goods. Philip's eldest son Louis was born on the 5th of September in 1187 and inherited the county of Artois in 1190 when his mother Isabel died. The main source of funding for Philip's army was from the royal domain. In times of conflict, he could immediately call up 250 knights, 250 horse sergeants, 100 mounted crossbowmen, 133 crossbowmen on foot, 2,000 foot sergeants, and 300 mercenaries. Towards the end of his reign, the king could muster some 3,000 knights, 9,000 sergeants, 6,000 urban militiamen, and thousands of foot sergeants. Using his increased revenues, Philip was the first Capetian king to build a French navy actively. By 1215, his fleet could carry a total of 7,000 men. Within 2 years, his fleet included 10 large ships and many smaller ones. Wars with his vassals. In 1181, Philip began a war with Philip, Count of Flanders, over the Vermandois, which King Philip claimed as his wife's dowry, and the Count was unwilling to give up. Finally, the Count of Flanders invaded France, ravaging the whole district between the Somme and the Oise before penetrating as far as Dammartin. Notified of Philip's impending approach with 2,000 knights, he turned around and headed back to Flanders. Philip chased him, and the two armies confronted each other near Amiens. By this stage, Philip had managed to counter the ambitions of the Count by breaking his alliances with Henry I, Duke of Brabant, and Philip of Heinsberg, Archbishop of Cologne. This, together with an uncertain outcome were he to engage the French in battle, forced the Count to conclude a peace. In July 1185, the Treaty of Boves left the disputed territory partitioned, with Amiens, Artois, and numerous other places passing to the king, and the remainder, with the county of Vermandois proper, left provisionally to the Count of Flanders. It was during this time that Philip II was nicknamed Augustus by the monk Rigord for augmenting French lands. Meanwhile, in 1184, Stephen I of Sancerre and his Brabancan mercenaries ravaged the Aulernais. Philip defeated him with the aid of the Confrères de la Paix. War with Henry II. Philip also began to wage war with King Henry II of England, who was also Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine in France. The death of Henry's eldest son, Henry the Young King, in June 1183, began a dispute over the dower of Philip's widowed sister Margaret. Philip insisted that the dower should be returned to France, as the marriage did not produce any children as per the betrothal agreement. The two kings would hold conferences at the foot of an elm tree near Gisors, which was supposition that it would overshadow each monarch's territory, but to no avail. Philip pushed the case further when King Beacutle III of Hungary asked for the widow's hand in marriage, and thus her dowry had to be returned, to which Henry finally agreed. The death in 1186 of Henry's fourth son, Geoffrey II, Duke of Brittany, began a new round of disputes, as Henry insisted that he retain the guardianship of the duchy for his unborn grandson Arthur I, Duke of Brittany. Philip, as Henry's liege lord, objected, stating that he should be the rightful guardian until the birth of the child. Philip then raised the issue of his other sister, Alice, Countess of Vexin, and her delayed betrothal to Henry's son Richard I of England, nicknamed Richard the Lionheart. With these grievances, 2 years of combat followed, but the situation remained unchanged. Philip initially allied with Henry's young sons Richard the Lionheart and John Lagland, who were in rebellion against the father. Philip II launched an attack on Berry in the summer of 1187, but in June made a truce with Henry, which left Issoudun in his hands and also granted him Fréteval in Vendomois, though the truce was for 2 years. Philip found grounds for resuming hostilities in the summer of 1188. He skillfully exploited the estrangement between Henry and Richard did homage to him voluntarily at Vansmolens in November 1188. In 1189, Richard openly joined forces with Philip to drive Henry into abject submission. They chased him from Le Mans to Saumur, losing Tours in the process, before forcing him to acknowledge Richard as his heir. Finally, by the Treaty of Isole-Rideau, Henry was forced to renew his own homage, confirm the cession of Issoudun to Philip, and renounce his claim to suzerainty over Auvergne. Henry died 2 days later. His death, and the news of the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin, diverted attention from the Franco-English War. The Angevin kings of England were Philip's most powerful and dangerous vassals as Dukes of Normandy and Aquitaine and Counts of Anjou. Philip made it his life's work to destroy Angevin power in France. One of his most effective tools was to befriend all of Henry's sons and use them to foment rebellion against the father. He maintained friendships with Henry the young king and Geoffrey too until their deaths. Indeed, at the funeral of Geoffrey, he was so overcome with grief that he had to be forcibly restrained from casting himself into the grave. He broke off his friendships with Henry's younger sons Richard and John as each acceded to the English throne. Third Crusade. Philip travelled to the Holy Land to participate in the Third Crusade of 1189 to 1192 with King Richard I of England and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. His army left Vézelay on the 1st of July 1190. At first, the French and English Crusaders travelled together, but the armies split at Lyon, after Richard decided to go by sea, whereas Philip took the overland route through the Alps to Genoa. The French and English armies were reunited in Messina, where they wintered together. On the 30th of March 1191, the French set sail for the Holy Land and Philip arrived on the 20th of May. He then marched to Acre, which was already under siege by a lesser contingent of Crusaders, and he started to construct siege equipment before Richard arrived on the 8th of June. By the time Acre surrendered on the 12th of July, Philip was severely ill with dysentery, which reduced his zeal. Ties with Richard were further strained after the latter acted in a haughty manner after Acre fell to the Crusaders. More importantly, the siege of Acre resulted in the death of Philip, Count of Flanders, who held the county of Vermandois proper. His death threatened to derail the Treaty of Gisors that Philip had orchestrated to isolate the powerful Blois Champagne faction. Philip decided to return to France to settle the issue of succession in Flanders, a decision that displeased Richard, who said, "It is a shame and a disgrace on my lord if he goes away without having finished the business that brought him hither, but still, if he finds himself in bad health, or is afraid lest he should die here, his will be done." On the 31st of July 1191, the French army of 10,000 men remained in Outremer under the command of Hugh III, Duke of Burgundy. Philip and his cousin Peter of Courtenay, Count of Nevers, made the way to Genoa, and from the return to France. The decision to return was also fueled by the realization that with Richard campaigning in the Holy Land, English possessions in northern France would be open to attack. After Richard's delayed return home, war between England and France would ensue over possession of English-controlled territories.